Yeah, I've been thinking about certain matters lately, you know, and experiences and the Lord's experiences and the Lord's words and the Lord in certain situations and how He dealt with them. And, how we as believers are delivered completely from the world's way of thinking about most everything. No, not most. About everything. How even the world's way of thinking is counter to everything that the Lord would speak to us about. Opposing, even. Not merely counter in the sense of not with it, but against it. And matters of identity, they're pretty important, and we're finding out today how important they are. It's not that they were never or ever less important. It's just that today, in this era, this time period, the matter of who is who has become exquisitely focused, with all the deep fake stuff going on and all of the other stuff that identity theft and all these things that takes place. Now, it's always been the purview of the fallen man to come up with, fake ID, to be a hypocrite, to say he's one thing he's not, to try to conceal his identity by means of subterfuge and whatever, So that's not new. But what we have found with all this technology that supposedly would make it easier, right? I mean, think, 1,000 years ago, somebody said, well, who's this guy, Edward? Well, he's 6 foot tall, he's thin, he's this, he's that. And then maybe at best, at the time you draw some kind of half whatever picture of him and say this is kind of what he looks like. That's Edward if you see him, and all those wanted posters we used to see on the westerns, all those renderings. But then the camera came along, okay, and this is my Uncle John. This is what my Uncle John looks like. This is what Abraham Lincoln looks like. We have paintings of George Washington. We trust them pretty much, but I mean, we have photos of Abraham Lincoln. So all this stuff developed, identities and who is who and what's what and how that can be determined and who is what. Then we got deep fakes and we got people hijacking all these things that we used to secure identity to people and finding out it's all being shown for what it is. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Doesn't do what it claims to do, or if it at once does, immediately people are working counter to it to undermine it. So I see that, this matter of identity, and as believers, we know, you're birthed into the earth by God. You're sent here. You don't know anybody anything. You don't know anybody who you are as far as your name or anything like that. You are a man in the earth, no more nor less than any other man in the earth, with the same privileges given by God to be who you are. And if you care to give your identity to someone who you are, well, I'm Abraham of Ur of the Chaldees or whatever, that's fine. But otherwise, nobody has any demand upon you. Nobody has any authority in the earth over you to demand you tell them who you are or what you're about. Unless, and this is where it gets tricky, man can make any sorts of rules he wants. And he does, You have to do this, you have to do that. You are obligated, if you are here, to behave this way. You are obligated if you are there to deport yourself in such and such a manner and have such and such papers available. And so we have passports, we have IDs, we have licenses, we have all these things with references to who we are, and it's very important to the people in the authority that they know that we are who we say we are. You know, if you're going into another country, they look at the passport and say, they look at your face and, you know, want to make sure this guy is who he says he is, and that the passport's legitimate, and that the passport is saying what he's about. So this has become very important amongst men in the world, isn't it? Yeah. And so much so that we just buy into it. Admit it. We buy into it. It's normal. We endorse it daily. We are all for it in a lot of senses, you know? You have to let me know who you are. I have to know who you are. I have to know. But, you know, Jesus had a wonderful handle on it. He understood. You don't know me. You can't know me. Where I come from, you don't know. No man knows the Son. So it don't matter who Jesus was going to tell, you know, what they wanted to tell us plainly. Who are you? Where, you know, what are you about? Yeah. So I think about that, you know, and how we learn through many experiences that all this structure that looks so big and grand and important and absolutely essential and necessary, and no one could live without it, and it's absolutely reasonable, and it's all a bunch of malarkey, and it's all a house of cards, and it's coming down, even as I said, you know, with all this stuff, deep fakes and stuff like that. People can watch something and they don't know. You won't know if this is me speaking, this is some other guy that's done something, who I am, what I'm about. But we have something the world does not have, praise God. We have spirit. We have the Spirit. And spirit is the only recognition given by God. It is the only recognition whereby a man can know anything is spirit. Zero other, nothing other. As a matter of fact, all other will be confusing and is being confused, manifestly. Even according to God's plan, God's will, God's desire, that everything other than His giving of what He gives will stand. So if a man doesn't know anyone after the Spirit, he doesn't know anything. If a man doesn't know anything after the Spirit, he doesn't know anything. And that's why Paul even said, you know, having known Him in the flesh, we know Him thus no longer. We know no man after the flesh. So spirit is our means of communication. Spirit is our means of verification. Spirit is our means of instruction. Spirit is our means of revelation. Spirit is our means of life. And when I say means, I don't mean as a tool. I do not mean as something we utilize. It is, and even saying it is mildly unpleasant. But the Spirit is that in which we live. The Spirit is that in which we live and move, have our being, have all relationship to all other things in creation. Spirit. So it matters not who I would tell you who I am. It matters not to me who you would tell me who you are or what you are. Spirit is the only communication of knowing. So I think about that. Think about the time I spent some time as a guest of the county, and after several weeks there and finding out how little I really liked being incarcerated, I didn't much like it at all, and they came to get me and they were going to release me. And as they were about to do that, they brought me to a window, and this guy demanded the very thing that they say the man demanded the very thing, which was my legal name. Okay? Which was my legal name. He demanded to have that, which was the very thing that got me put in the pokey in the beginning. I mean, besides the fact that I was preaching on the street. But since I was not breaking any laws, certainly not, in that sense that you believe freedom of speech exists in the United States to a great extent. And So he demanded that of me, and I realized at that point, I'm all set to be released, and still it's back to that. And I was at a crossroads, because after several weeks there, finding out, okay, this is what it is, but I've never liked much being in jail. I certainly didn't like being there several weeks, and ready to get out, and then I want that again. What to do? So God gave me grace to not supply the thing they thought they could demand of me. I'd done nothing wrong. What authority do you have over me unless I have done something that is unlawful, illegal, illegitimate? And so they put me back in the holding tank, and long and the short of it is that God gave me more grace. I started preaching as loud as I could, and they threw me out of jail. I just started preaching. And I'll tell you, when I was back there, I thought, oh man, I'm just going to add more time. These guys are really going to be upset. I'm just going to add more time. But God gets you to the point where you don't care about those things. He really does. God gets you to the point where you don't care. You're going to bring down things on yourself that in one sense look like it's only going to make it worse, but are really for your deliverance. It's like friendly fire, It's like friendly fire, which is the Holy Spirit. You have all these enemies around you, and you're being attacked. And I'm not speaking of myself in that situation, but just as you are going to learn, you are going to be in situations where you are so beset by either men under the influence or just in the spiritual realm that you will get past the point of caring for your own life, and you are going to want to call down the fire that consumes. You're going to give the artillery your exact coordinates so that the enemy with you is wiped out. Some of you have had this experience. Some of you have not. But you will learn what friendly fire is. And how God gets you there, and how you live through it. And then when you stand up and you look around and you see everything else smoldering, you'll know there's a God in Israel. So I think of Jesus before Pilate, and Pilate's boast of his authority. When Jesus wouldn't speak to him, he said, you won't answer me? Don't you know I have authority to kill you or release you? Now, Jesus said the very loving thing that Pilate needed to hear. You would have no authority over me except it were granted you by my Father. For had Jesus allowed Pilate to continue in that lie, or any form of thinking this authority was self-generated, that this authority was of himself, that he held any position except that as given him by God, Jesus would be hating Pilate to let him continue in that falsehood, that lie. And so Jesus told him the truth. Jesus wasn't back-talking him. Jesus wasn't giving him a hard time. Jesus was setting him straight for his good. You would have no authority over me except it were given you by my Father who is in heaven. That was what Pilate really needed to hear, despite all his boasting and thinking whatever he thought of himself. I don't even know. It doesn't say, whether Pilate was whatever, except he feared the Jews. So we do know that at least was in some operation with him, where his integrity was compromised by fear of what others might think, do, act, respond to him. The minute you enter that, you're entering a snare. You're putting up a false image of God. You are hating your neighbor. It doesn't mean you have to be a rebel. It doesn't mean you have to go about contradicting, and it doesn't mean you have to go about seeking to break every rule to prove something. But by the grace of God, you are what you are. And by the grace of God through Jesus Christ, there was a great cost involved in the making of you of who you are. And you will come up against weighing the cost of what Jesus has done for you and what men can do to you or threaten to do to you or warn you against. And you will find that the one so far, it's not even a comparison. It's not even a comparison. What men can do as opposed to what God has done in Jesus Christ. But I say again, we have to discover this. We have to find this out. It's true. It's absolutely true. It's made true to us through the work of God, through Jesus Christ. We confess it. But when it's made real in experience, it is made real in our experience. And so the threats of man, what man says he will do, warn you about, what you owe him, what you owe society, what you owe this and that. Paul summed up quite nicely, owe no man anything but to love him. And it is not love to blithely go along as though with God's full endorsement of all of the machinations and contrivances of man are going to stand forever and therefore are of some eternal value. They do not bear the sword in vain. There is their authority, but it can only be exercised over you to the extent God wills, allows, and desires. So any who would boast, don't you know we can do this to you? Don't you know we can do that to you? Don't you know that you are subject to us in this? When it is boast, for they do not bear the sword in vain, and God would not have us be rebels. So we gladly pay our taxes. Why? Because we have to? No. So that we're not an offense. May you come to pay your taxes so you're not an offense. Of whom, Jesus asked, do the kings of the earth require tribute? Their sons or of strangers? Of strangers, Lord. The king doesn't tell his son, you owe me such and such in taxes. It's of strangers. Nevertheless, says Jesus, go down and catch that fish. You'll find 2 coins in its mouth, and pay it for Peter and I, so that we do not offend them. Jesus in that nevertheless was saying, then are the children free. Because that was part of what he said when he said the kings do not, require their children to pay taxes. Then are the children free, Jesus said. This world, this earth, better put, is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Nobody gives you a right to be here. Nobody allows you the right to be here. You are here by the will of God. No man can supersede that. No man can get between you and God and say you are only allowed to be here as long as we allow or I allow you to be here. And we are finding out, because this matter of identity is of all importance to us as believers. Who we are, whose we are, who He is in us, and who we are to Him. And we find out He is very valiant on behalf of those who are His. He will not leave us comfortless. We are not abandoned as orphans, no matter how much bluster, huffing, and puffing may take place in the world. There is nothing that any can do to another apart from the will of God. And that is what we are here to proclaim through Jesus Christ. the will of God accomplished in Jesus Christ, by Jesus Christ, through Jesus Christ. And so we would be very poor ambassadors indeed, if in any way, in what is to us in some ways a strange land, we allowed for the impugning of the authority of our King as ambassadors. We are sent as ambassadors. The world is not given the choice of whether they will receive us or not, in the sense that they allow us. And many of you are going to find out that faith is completely opposed to the world. The world is completely opposed to faith. So to the extent that the church is recognized, or your church or your religion is recognized by the governments of this world, the men of this world, the people of this world, as the church, that is the precise endorsement that it is not the church. The world will not recognize and cannot recognize the Lord, apart from the revelation, any more than you or I can. Nor can the world recognize what the church is, or decide we accept this as the church, or these forms as church is. It's a word that should never even be in the mouth of the worldly. But because of whatever, and God's good purpose and pleasure, men think they can define it, identify it, and deal with it accordingly. So be well, be blessed, be encouraged, be comforted, be strengthened with all might in your inner man. For he who is coming comes quickly and will not delay. Be ready.